Welcome to the Next Level Income Show, where it's our goal to take your income, your investments, and your life to the next level. I'm Chris Larson.
I'm Caleb Baldwin.
You can get our free book at nextlevelincome.com. Today on our show, we have Brandon Abbott. He is of passiveinvesting.com team, and he specializes in asset acquisitions and management. As a professional in the field of real estate and construction since 2005, he brings specialized knowledge when finding, underwriting, and ultimately when managing assets. He spent the recent years as a top professional in the property and casualty side of both residential and commercial insurance. And today, he manages over $200 million in multifamily properties in the Southeast after starting investing in 2010. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Chris, Caleb, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So, Brandon, we met through the multifamily community. And I'd like for you to tell our audience a little bit how you went from being a contractor during the Great Recession, a time that we know quite well, to now owning over $200 million in multifamily properties.
Yeah, so life's a journey, right? So mine started, back in my college days. I'm originally from upstate New York and came down to go to college in South Carolina. The college I was attending wasn't for me. They're pretty strict, kind of, really tight knit, kind of militant type school. And at that point in my life, I wasn't ready for that. So I just stuck around in South Carolina and got a job working construction. So went through the ranks, doing everything, actually doing it myself, framing, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and kind of learning everything. And then started my own company and just around 2003, 2004, somewhere in there. And started as a general contractor building custom homes in the Greenville, South Carolina market, which we have some properties in now. And really just tried to grow that. So went from the general contracting company and then started a framing company that would work and do my projects as well as other builders' projects. So I could kind of spread myself out across the whole industry. Same thing with grading. So I had another grading division. So those three facets. And then, growing, the sky's the limit, no end in sight, contracts all over the place. And then, what's that?
Times were good.
Oh yeah. Hey man, there's, no end in sight really, and kept over leveraging really was what I was doing, building, buying equipment, bulldozers, excavators, trucks, just trying to scale up. And that was all fine as long as you had cash flow. And that's going to be a key word. So cash flow stopped when Fannie and Freddie stopped lending money at that moment in time. So while I had contracts signed, ready to go, nobody could get the money. And so I'm sitting on all these liabilities, bulldozers and excavators and all this equipment, which is very high cost monthly, and zero cash flow, just went to nothing. Oh, like literally overnight, really. And so that left us kind of in a bind. So we learned a lot of valuable lessons about cash flow, about leverage, good leverage, bad leverage. So at that moment in time, I had 3 girls. I currently have 4, but at that moment we had just my wife had just given birth to our 3rd. And so we had, we were hurt, financially because of this at the time. So I'm always the type of person who just do whatever it takes to get the job done. So I got a job working UPS morning shift, got a job working night shift at a gas station, and then started actually a hot dog street vending business just to make ends meet. And I did that and got contracts with different sports venues. And in the meantime, got my adjuster's license, went into the insurance field and worked in the insurance field for 8 years, and just built my knowledge of estimating and technology in the field. And then finally got with the right team and looked into multifamily. And back when the housing crash occurred, I was thinking to myself, we had to move out of our house. Times were hard. We moved into an apartment, and I was saying to myself, I need to be investing in rentals because that's where the money is. It's constant. No matter what happens, if the market goes up or down, people have to live somewhere. And when they can't get a mortgage or their house is being foreclosed on when in a recession, they're going to move into an apartment. Yeah. And so fast forward, 8 years later, I was exposed to multifamily and really started getting into that, and here we are today.
Wow. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because, being in real estate since 99, I watched my parents, and, we've talked about this on the show before. My parents were both working for a construction company in the early 90s when the savings and loan crisis happened. And I saw it then. I saw it happen, 10 years ago. And I think today a lot of people are kind of having the same feelings, Brandon. Like times are good. The stock market's at record highs. My house is worth more than it's ever been before. Unemployment's super low. Like things can't get, things aren't going to change. And I think it's a good lesson that, like you said, when times are good, you have to look and say, okay, are the fundamentals good? Are we focusing on the right stuff? Because, when the music stops and there's no chairs sitting around, you don't want to be the one left standing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Excellent. Yeah.
And you had said you finally got with the right team, and we had Danny Randazzo on a recent episode, and your other partner, Dan Hanford, we're having on an upcoming episode. Would you share how you met with them initially and got started, and what makes the three of you such a great team working together?
Yeah, definitely. When you have a business partner, it needs to be organic. It really does. It's not something that it's not a sterile selection of people. It has to be something that, it's a give and take. And Dan and I actually go to church together, and our children go to the same school here about a mile up the street. And we've known each other. Dan's in the medical field, and we've known each other. We'd talked before. But we took a trip, or he took my wife and I on a trip with another couple from our church to New York City for the day. And on the plane flight up, we were talking, and he was talking about how he was getting into multifamily and, telling me the numbers, and the returns and the cash flows, and light bulbs were just boom, 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 boom. This is I understand it. I get it. Where do I sign up? So got back from that trip and just downloaded. I just podcasts, books, just absorbed as much information as possible, learning the vocabulary, the lingo. Came back around, started talking with Dan about teaming up and doing something together. And so we got together with the wives because, like I said, it's organic, and, everybody has to be on board because it is a family environment. It has to be that. If it's just business, and it is business, but it has to be more than that. So we wanted to make sure that everybody was aligned and we all got along good. And that went well. My wife and his wife are good friends. And so we started, looking for properties and getting into it. And then I remember hearing Danny Randazzo on one of Dan's podcasts. He did the Tough Decisions for Entrepreneurs, and I remember listening to Danny. And Danny and Dan were in the same mentorship program together. And so they knew each other already. Well, fast forward a little bit, we were looking at a property in Charleston. Dan and I were, and Danny was in Charleston, and we got to talking to him. Hey, he knows the market. Let's ask him what he thinks. And we just got to talking and said, hey, what do you think about teaming up? So we did that, decided to team up. We did the same thing. We got all the wives together. We went and rented a place in Amelia Island and had all the wives come and made sure everybody, it gelled really well. And everything was good there. So the rest is history. But the reason it makes us such a great team is because we each have our area of expertise. And each of us really doesn't enjoy the other one's lane. And that is very crucial because we don't cross lanes very much. We give feedback. We make decisions as a team, as the three of us. Every decision we make, we talk and we make a decision together. But I said acquisitions and CapEx implementation and oversight. Danny's numbers. He loves spreadsheets. He's a spreadsheet nerd. And Dan is the marketing guy. He likes to be out there, and he's on the podcast and doing webinars, and he's investor relations. So it works so well together. So it's a great team.
No, it really is. And Brandon, growing up in a household where my stepdad was a contractor and seeing that and spending days in the field with you, watching you, deal with the teams, it really is different than dealing with spreadsheets and numbers. And look, most people know I love a spreadsheet as much as anybody does. I love talking to Danny about that. But I love watching you in action and seeing how you interact with the teams. So can you, one of the things that you mentioned, you didn't talk much about, was being a commercial insurance adjuster. And can you share a little bit about what you learned in that field and how that translates to what you do now and how that has turned into a competitive advantage for you guys?
Yeah, so when in insurance, it goes in ebbs and flows. So when a hurricane comes, it's all out. You put everything aside, you turn your life off, you just run claims, and you have to look for efficiencies and ways to make things faster and better. And you have to think outside the box. You have to be better than your competitors. And so, some of the things I would do, was first thing I did, one of the big hurricanes that we had a few years ago was go out and buy a drone. So I went out and bought the drone because sometimes the houses were too high, like 3-story, and then I'd have to make a second trip back or get a ladder assist is what we call it from a roofer, and it's just a waste of time. So if I had a drone and I could send that thing up there, I could check for wind damage, hail damage, and I could do it from my car if I wanted to. And the technology, it's amazing. I can actually tie into my software, my estimating software. It'll control the drone, it'll send it up, and it'll go around the house and take 3D photos, and it'll import it into my estimating system and create a 3D sketch within my estimating system. And then I click a macro that I pre-built with all the items necessary for like a roof replacement. So I can write an estimate. So I just import, click the macro, and I just wrote, a $50,000 roof estimate in 5 minutes. Wow. As opposed to getting a ladder out and doing this and making a second trip and drawing the sketch all by hand. And then satellite imagery, we do that a lot. So same thing, I can just pull down satellite imagery on a set house or building, and it'll import into there, and I can just run macros. And then just learning how to estimate where the market's at, the difference between zip codes and pricing. So all that was very valuable in moving forward, or the next step or the next layer of my professional life.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at today. I mean, if you went and bought an apartment building in 2011, 2012, I mean, you could go and color the siding with a magic marker and watch the price go up and really do nothing. It's amazing, right? Today the market is so competitive. So one of the things we talk about with Danny is how very small differences in rent can add up to millions of dollars in value. Can you share some of your experiences, Brandon, kind of, what you were just talking about, where you've uncovered some of these hidden value opportunities that maybe other operators haven't seen?
Yeah, and again, it's about being, thinking outside the box and being as most efficient as you can. So, I'll start off with cap rates. You hear a lot of people talk about, oh, cap rates are compressed. You can't buy anything at a sub 5 cap. Well, there's benefits to a compressed.
So before you go on, so do you mind explaining for the audience like what a cap rate is?
Sure. So that's pretty much your market gauge. So that's the return on your investment in the market. So it's really just a gauge is all it is. So I can look at properties that were purchased recently and say, oh, well, that's sold for a 5 cap. And so if I'm getting ready to buy a property in the same market and they're wanting to go in at a 4.5 cap, I can say I'm overpaying in that market, only in that market. Now you may go to another market and 4.5 may be a great cap rate, but it's just a gauge of where the market is.
Got it.
And
so a 5 cap would be equivalent to a $100,000 investment would put out $5,000. That'd be 5% or a 5 cap. Is that right?
Yeah, basically,
Right.
For rough numbers. And so a lot of people get scared with low cap rates. Okay, so for example, like some efficiencies, one of our properties, when we got onto the property, it had 3 sets of dumpsters across the property, and they were paying a rental of $130 a month for each of those dumpsters. All right, so I had 3 times 130, so $390 a month. And so what we did is we consolidated. So I built a dumpster enclosure, went to 2 dumpsters because I checked with the county to see if that would be sufficient for our occupancy. They said yes. We also found out that we were in the county and that they would provide trash service with the dumpsters for $60 a month, right? So, so you had a $390 a month cost drop and then drop down to $60. So for a savings of $330 a month.
Wow.
Minor, right? We're talking $1 million properties. What's $330? Okay, so $330 times 12 months. That's an annual cost of $39.60. Or a savings of $39.60. All right, and then now we'll bring in the cap rate. So if we bought that at a 5 cap, so you divide that number by 0.05, that's a savings of that's a valuation increase of $79,000.
$79,000 from going from 3 dumpsters to 2.
Right, exactly. So don't minimize the small stuff. I mean, and so you run that same scenario, $39.60. Let's say I bought it at a 4.5 cap. Okay, now it's a valuation increase of $88,000. So you see, I got more. So compressed cap rate is not a bad thing because you get a higher return on your investment. Now, as long as you're buying equal with your market cap, so if you bought, if the market's selling at a 5 and you bought it at 4.5, then you might have trouble exiting at that same. But this another example would be operation side. Like, one of the properties went in and they were paying an IT company. The management was paying IT company and they were putting in Microsoft Office and they were charging like $700 to install Microsoft Office. I was like, I can go to Best Buy and buy it for like $65 and I'll install it, and they were paying like a residual monthly fee of $500 a month to this IT company. And all they did was like install software when you needed it. And a lot of times owners don't get deep into the financials, the operations side, that organic value add. It's not just sheetrock and granite countertops or new flooring. It's trimming operations and small little things. Save $330 a month, and you just made yourself a bunch of money.
Well, that's what like back to your point of staying in your lane, Brandon. When you have a guy like Danny looking at the high level numbers, knowing how to analyze, a market and a property on a spreadsheet, and then having you be able to walk in behind him and know how to implement it. I think it's a powerful combination. And I mean, your examples right there, they remind me of a book I just read. It's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And Caleb and I were both cyclists. In there, he talks about David Brailsford, and he is the coach that took the English cycling team from the bottom to the top cycling team in the world at the Olympics, at the Tour de France. They've won, multiple Tour de France's, Tours de France, I should say, in the past decade. And David Brailsford talked about making little 1% changes. And if you make a 1% change in all these different areas, what it adds up to. And I think it's a perfect example of what you do as well. It's awesome.
Definitely.
So at our recent investor meetup, you were telling me and some of the other people there about how you work with Lowe's buying things in bulk when you're renovating these apartments and all of that to add value. Could you go into that a little bit as a way of sort of further explaining how finding these ways for those marginal gains can really help increase the value to make it a profitable investment?
Sure. So, in the contracting world, you have to be a strong negotiator, and, you just have to just set the bar. Extreme anchors, if you've ever listened to, never split the difference, extreme anchors. So that I kind of use that in the setting prices for suppliers and contractors. And
great book.
One of the things, yeah, that's a great book. One of the things that, that we try to do is go straight to manufacturers and cut out the middleman, because everybody that touches it is getting a piece of that pie. So if you can get all the other hands off of it, you're getting a bigger slice. Okay. So we want to go direct to the manufacturer. Well, but what we found on some items was that with the buying power of a company like Lowe's, who's, just they can buy in huge bulk and they can get better contracts than I can, even going directly to the manufacturer. So for instance, we had a light manufacturer that we were using. We were buying them from Lowe's. We're like, hey, let's get Lowe's hand off that pie and let's go in and try to, buy this directly from this manufacturer. Well, we go to the manufacturer and we get in with them and we're talking, we'll buy pallets at a time and we're doing, thousands of units. annually, and, great, thinking, we'll sell them. It was higher than what we were buying it from Lowe's for, and it's like, we're like, wait a second. So we went back to Lowe's, and just what we will do is we'll go in when we purchase a property, we'll go in the unit and we'll get every piece that we need. And then I'll go onto the website or go into the store and get all the SKUs and the quantities so I'll just multiply it times 260 units or whatever I need. And I'll submit that to Lowe's corporate, and then they'll shoot me back a price of what they'll sell it to me for. And a lot of times they'll even price match. So, I know for a fact that I'm getting things less than anybody else is. I can say anybody else because I've looked at other bids, and it's very, very competitive. So don't be afraid to say don't accept the first offer. Just say, well, this is what I'm doing. Hey, sell yourself on the volume. Really, we're talking about small gains. That's the beauty of multifamily, the scale, right? Yeah. The economies of scale is tremendous when you're negotiating prices. I mean, hey guys, I got a project that's going to last you 18 months. Forget about what you're doing right now, but if you're going to do it, I want it for this price, and I'll keep you busy for 18 months. So
awesome. Yeah, in our book we talk about a lot of the things you mentioned. We talk about cap rates, we talk about adding value, we talk about the scale and why I sold all my single family rentals and moved into multifamily. I mean, the scale is whether it's management or like you're talking about, Brandon, it's fantastic. So here we're a fan of B-grade multifamily properties, workforce housing. How did you end up focusing on B-grade, and why do you continue to focus on it in this market?
Yeah, so it's interesting kind of the way you shift mindset as you get into the industry. So we originally started out looking at C's and B's. But what we found was that C's are great because there's so much you can do to the property, because usually they're older vintage, mid 70s to mid 80s. The problem is that it's hard to change the reputation of a neighborhood. Okay, so you can go in and you can just deck that thing out, granite, marble, whatever you want to do, all just stainless, everything, and it could look beautiful. But the people that live in that sub-market know that neighborhood for what it's been for years and years. And so it takes a lot of time to change the public opinion of a property. So you have to be careful about buying a property that has a bad reputation and just trying to make it better by putting lipstick on a pig, okay, if I can just put it to you that way. So then we said, well, B-class assets, they're already nice assets. They're already known to be a good neighborhood, better neighborhood, I would say. We're not talking D, but now we're moving up from C, and so now we're talking about people that choose to live in apartments as opposed to people that have to live in apartments. So our stabilization is better, our retention is better, and they appreciate the value add, and they can afford the value add. So that's why the B class works well, and there's less work involved. So again, we're called passiveinvesting.com. So if I can get the same return and do less work, then that is ideal, okay? And it's less of a risk. It's less of a risk because the neighborhood's already known to be a good neighborhood. We're just going to make it better. Okay?
Yeah.
So that, and people talk about, in a downturn, C's do better and B's do better, or A, So I actually looked into that and did some of the research back in the housing crash or the recession, and there was only a 50 basis point spread between B, C, and A. Between each other, 50 basis points in vacancy increase. So that's marginal, so it's not really a factor.
Yeah, and it's really, you make a great point. It's, if you're in this space, if you're in the value add space, people have, like you said at the beginning of the show, Brandon, people have to have a place to live regardless of where you are. And that's why it's important to look at the actual neighborhood, look at the location, and dive deep into that. I know the last property we worked together on, I mean, the year-over-year rent increase is near double digits in that specific market, and it's amazing how strong it is. So it's a great area, but picking the best market within the areas is very important.
People get confused sometimes with multifamily, and they forget that you are buying a business that's selling a product, and that product is a home. Okay, that's what it is. So, anytime you buy a business, what's the thing with real estate? Location, location, location. So you could have the best product, you could have the best store, right? But it's in the worst location. And it's not going to do as well. So you could have the same product and be in a better location, and now you're going to do better. And so that's kind of the mindset behind the B class asset.
Fantastic.
Yeah, another common question that seems to come up a lot with people trying to learn more about multifamily is how the hold period of the asset is determined. Could you share what your approach is to that and how you guys determine the hold period for the assets?
Right. So that's driven by IRR, internal rate of return, and that's your return on investment with the time factor included. So, if you say, oh, I put in $100,000 and I got $200,000 back, that's a great return until I say it took 25 years to get that back. So now it's not a great return. So we look for certain factors in the IRR for our investors, and the market is adjusted. So we've had to adjust those numbers as the market changes. But, we look at that factor, the IRR factor. And so you hit a certain point where you start to drop in IRR. So after, if you're doing like a bridge debt and you've changed to permanent debt, your IRR is going to be affected at a certain year after you've been stabilized. So it really just depends on the asset, the purchase price, the return, and we just look at those numbers and say, okay, basically it ends up being usually a 5-year hold makes sense from an IRR perspective, because then it starts to drop, it starts to go down. And so that's what we're looking at. But, if if the market goes crazy and we buy an asset and we stabilize it faster than we thought, and we're able to sell it in a year, the IRR is through the roof, because we returned capital and they got returns, the investors got returns. But their equity multiple does, they didn't double their money over because we didn't hold it for 5 years, but their IRR is through the roof and they just rolled into another property. So, it's really, it's not a dogmatic thing. It's really, asset specific and market specific. So, like I said, we've seen properties that people have purchased, ones that we were looking to buy, and they purchased it 2 years ago and they're selling for double what they bought it for in 2 years. And so why would you not sell it, even though you'd underwritten to do 5 years? Go ahead. It makes sense. So.
Terrific. Thanks for walking through that. And that's something you guys talk about IRR, you talk about equity multiple. If anybody has any questions about that, you can reach out to us. We have some stuff about that in the book, and we can answer more questions on that as well. I think I told you before, you made a big impact on me when we spent the day together. And I think a lot of people don't realize what goes in, behind the scenes, kind of the magic sauce that your team has.
Yeah, you have to really know, you have to be around contractors. It's a different, they're a group of people that have, and if you can't relate to them, right? If you haven't been there and you don't, and also you have to understand what they're doing. So if you come to them and are just talking numbers, they're like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's trying to get me to do this. But if I've actually done the work and I understand what kind of time goes into it, I know you're overcharging me because I know I could do it at this amount of time for this rate. And come on, man. And once they understand that you know what you're talking about, it changes. The attitude changes. So it really makes a difference.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. We're building our house now and just, being around it. I got a project manager who's been in it, and, you come in and he gets it, I get it, and the shit gets done,
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to be a hard nose, man. You have to be able to crack the whip and not be afraid to, make a change. You have to be able to shift on a dime. So
yeah, cool, man. All right, let's wrap it up.
Yeah. So one question we ask on every show is if you could go back in time and talk with your 25-year-old self and give him one piece of advice from everything you've learned, what would that piece of advice be?
So I think it would be never always have a bigger vision. Don't limit yourself to what you know now. Always be looking for more. That I've always said my whole life, no knowledge is bad knowledge. You never know where you're going to be able to use it. And I believe that people are built in layers, so you have specific experiences that happen at specific times that make you who you are today. And more layers are going to get added tomorrow and the next day through experience. And so never be afraid of change. And the one thing, and this is something I knew back at my 25-year-old self, but the biggest enemy to success is an inability to change your mindset. And when I run into people and I try to explain to them about multifamily investing, and you could sell it every which way, and the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And because they cannot change their mindset. Yeah, but I always have been told this, this, and this, and they never open their ears and listen to what's being said. And that's the big thing. Listen and be okay with changing and be okay with being wrong. Like, hey, yeah, that's what I thought, but you know what? That makes sense. And have a paradigm shift and just go in that direction and be okay. Put yourself in an uncomfortable position and do what it takes to get it done. And so that's what I would tell anybody, no matter how old you are.
That's fantastic advice. That is fantastic advice. And we were talking about our kids before the show, and that's one thing my wife and I tell our boys, Brandon, is don't be afraid to fail. It's okay. We ask them, hey, what was your failure today? It's great. Like, let's hear about the successes and the highlights, but you don't learn from that. And it's hard sometimes. It took me a lot of years. Again, going back to racing bikes, you'll lose a lot more races than you win, like 10 times if you're lucky. That's a low number. So getting used to failure, you'll learn quickly through it. And I know you face some tough challenges, but we want to thank you for being on the show, sharing your wisdom, sharing your experience with our audience. I know I've learned a lot. I know our audience will too, Brandon. So this will be airing after the holidays, but Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and your family.
Merry Christmas to you both, and I hope you have a good time with your families. And thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.